Today I'm speaking with Mike Lawrence. Mike, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me back. Good
So
to be speaking with you again.
Yeah, we spoke a week ago with Hannah Timpson about the idea of abuse that happens with childhood indoctrination. But I did want to get your story, your focus on all your research. I know you've done a ton of research, so I'm excited to talk to you and focus on that today. I did want to give a brief bio before we get started. Mike Lawrence is a researcher and author focused on the historicity and reliability of the Bible. He's also an activist focused on trying to expose and stop the damage done by compulsory childhood religious indoctrination. And just to let you all know, in the UK, there is no official separation of church and state, and there is compulsory worship to an extent of a Christian nature in schools, especially for young children. And Mike is doing a great job at exposing that and trying to fight against it and change the culture. He's also, on a personal note, he's a very accomplished painter, which you can see some of the works behind him. Are all those works behind you done by you?
Yes, yeah, they're all my, they're the ones I haven't sold, trying to sell. I've sold quite a few, but this is my relaxation. In addition to research, my relaxation is to paint, photography and painting.
Do you have any particular subjects? Do you tend to do more portraits or nature, or is it just all varieties?
No, I like to try a bit of everything, but I am a realist. I like to try and get a realism in the paintings that touch on photographic, and that's not everybody's cup of tea. A lot of people like to see more abstract or a mix of both, like Salvador Dali. But my personal desire is to create a realistic image. But I'm not that fussed on the subject, and I tend to chop and change. I like to try a little bit of everything, which I think you can see.
Yeah,
from the mix behind me.
That's an amazing skill. I love your work. I was looking last night at the one you did of different colored pebbles on the beach, and
yes,
that's the detail, and that's amazing.
That was a mind bender.
I believe
Mapping it out took at least a week, and then trying to stick to a different color pattern for each stone to individualize them was a complete mind blower. But I got there.
Well, that's awesome. And going back to your work for 10 years or more, you've studied the evidence for the existence of Jesus. And from what I can tell, the conclusion has been categorically that Jesus was a complete fabrication, plagiarized fiction, in your words. And again, in your words, the Jesus character is an adaptation of an earlier myth. So I'm looking forward to hearing some of the background for that research. You started with a book called Contra Ehrman, meaning against Bart Ehrman, who is also an atheist, but had argued and still argues, I believe, that there was a Jesus at the beginning, that this was not pure mythology. And that eventually, if I'm correct, evolved into the book 70. Is that fair to say?
Yes, yeah. I did an earlier book, Astonishing, put my teeth in, Astonishing Credulity.
Okay.
I read Bart Ehrman's book on Did Jesus Exist? And I saw statements made by Bart Ehrman in there that I knew from my studies were not correct statements, hence the reason for Contra Ehrman. I've since done a lot more study on Paul, the Apostle Paul, the extant documents and what particular Riesling and N.T. Wright have said about that. And I've changed my view on Paul and where he fits in, hence I've wrapped all three books up into the current book 70.
That's awesome. And you also do have a number of essays, I should mention, on the website, Notori, which stands for No to Religious Indoctrination. That's a great way to put that together. I'll have a link for that beneath the video if anyone wants to look at that, as well as your YouTube channel, Notori, so people can see some of your work. I did want to just give a brief description of the book 70, and then I wanted to kind of go back to your personal story before we dive into the meat of it.
Okay.
The book 70 again, and the subtitle is The 70-Year Reverse Construction, Thesis, and Christians Before Jesus. So in the first century, Common Era Judea, the Torah-compliant, temple-adherent Jews followed a yearly ritual of animal sacrifice at the temple altar. In their theology, this was the only ritual that would assure the forgiveness of sins. It had been that way for centuries. In August of the year 70, the unthinkable happened. Jerusalem was sacked by the Romans and the temple complex was destroyed. Along with it, the only means of sin forgiveness. What to do. This book forwards a thesis on what happened next and how that event was the pivotal trigger for the creation of what became the canonical Gospels. It was the initiation of the motive to construct a new sin forgiveness process. That process was the conception of a fictional Jesus figure, now accepted worldwide as factual. Some facts are so unpalatable that they are considered taboo, an issue not to be broached. But this book does broach the major taboo issue and states a claim that Christendom will not relish. That was a great intro to that book. I love it. Before we dive into the book 70, could you just give us a little bit more information about your story? I know we heard a little bit more about it in the interview with Hannah, but for anyone who didn't watch that, could you tell us just more about your background, especially religiously?
Okay, yeah, religiously from childhood, I do not come from a religious family. My parents were not religious, neither were either of my grandparents. So there was no religious ethos or enforcement in the home environment. Coming from the UK and going to school in the 70s, obviously it was there in the schools, even in the state schools. So I went to a state school, it was called Trinity. So the clue is in the title. And we were taken every religious ceremony. We were trotted from the school to the church, and we do the church service. And every morning they adhered to the law. Still the law today, but not all schools adhere to it. Which is there must be a morning service of a Christian nature assembly every morning, and there must be worship of basically the Jesus character. So we would have prayers, we would have hymns, and then you'd have a short sermon. More strict on a Friday than the other days of the week. And that's from infant school all the way through secondary school. So every day at school. And in addition to that, religious education, which when I went to school was more religious instruction and was purely Christian. It didn't touch any other religion.
Do they still adhere to that tightly? Like, are some schools allowed to just kind of wing it?
No, the state schools don't. It's a new generation, a younger generation of teachers in the States. It's still the law. So they are actually breaking the law, but the majority of state schools don't. They play lip service. They have an assembly, an all-inclusive, non-religious assembly each morning. They might do some prayers on a Friday. My children's secondary school did some prayers on a Friday, but then that was it. And religious education has been opened up in those schools to say, well, this is what the Christians believe and think and their tenets. This is what Muslims believe. This is what Jews believe. So it's more an education of what these people believe than instruction. Not the case in the faith schools. So that's only the government schools. In the faith schools, the Roman Catholic schools, they're really virulent form of Church of England schools, not all of them. And obviously you've got your Seventh-day Adventists and that. In those schools, it's quite strong, quite virulent. When you look at the perspectives for some of these schools, they'll say, like, on one day there will be time for children to reflect on their relationship with Jesus, as you were touching on in our last interview, and also time to go out into the community and, I suppose, what the Americans would say, witness or evangelize. These are school children. This is all kinds of wrong, but in the faith schools, it's quite strong. So the landscape has changed, but it's still there. For me,
so you grew up in that, then you were exposed to that as a child?
As a child, yes, but it didn't. I didn't adhere to it. It wasn't enforced at home. I didn't see it as any different to Greek mythology or Roman mythology. I just thought it was more stories. I didn't believe any of it was true.
So I assume your parents didn't believe either?
No. And it didn't actually concern me, really. As I grew older, I became to realise, much to my surprise, that the teachers that were telling us these stories actually believed them. So I think, well, okay, so you do think a man who was 600 years old built a large boat for two of every animal and Moses parted the Red Sea. But as a child, I thought they were just telling me a story, and I believe they thought it was a story. It wasn't until I got older that I realised they did believe it. My wife I went to school with comes from a Methodist family. So how staunchly they believed it, I don't know, but they were Methodists. And again, that didn't really bother me too much. At that time, I didn't have much truck with religion at all. I wasn't concerned. I didn't support it. I wasn't concerned by it. It wasn't until 9/11 that I started thinking that I want to research what it is about these books, these three books, basically, the Old Testament, New Testament, Quran, that could cause people to commit such atrocities. I'd also, at the age of 18, I'd been to Northern Ireland and witnessed Protestant and Catholic hatred firsthand, which sort of bubbled away in my mind for years. But again, it didn't concern me too much. Excuse me. And in that research, I thought, well, I'll start. I'm from the UK. I'll start with Christianity because we're from a Christian-based country. And it was my thought then that, well, there was a character, Jesus. Loads of people worship him. Clearly, he didn't do all these miracle things, but there was a biography that's been sexed up. It was during the course of the research and putting the documents that we have in chronological order, and then reviewing those against the backdrop of the history of the time, it starts to ring with you. This isn't true. This is just versions of Greco-Roman mystery religions mixed in with Jewish prophetic scripture from 600 BCE, little bit of Homer, you touched on yourself in Acts of the Apostles, the Iliad and the Odyssey, all wrapped up. And you can also see, when you study Josephus, and you look at some of Josephus's work, you can see some of these documents, the New Testament Gospels, were written after Josephus wrote his Antiquity of the Jews, because they've plucked items from that to include in their Gospels. When you lay all that out together, this is fiction. This character didn't exist. It's unfortunate that over the past 4 or 5 centuries, scholarship in the field, through duress and through loyalty, has basically forced us all to believe he was a real character. And it will probably be another 30, 40 decades before it shifts so much that people start to say, in the majority, he clearly didn't exist. But I do believe we're coming around that corner, and we are getting there, particularly when you consider about 30, 40 years ago, scholarship in this area would have said that the patriarchs were real characters, Moses, Abraham, but now you wouldn't find a scholar that would say that they were real characters. We are going to find that in the future with Jesus, so hopefully we're on the cusp.
I've been curious too on that note with more discoveries, if there's going to be any other Nag Hammadis or Dead Sea Scroll discoveries that come up. I mean, I know it's not super likely, we can't count it, but it'd be interesting if there were other gospels that we never heard of, or some other explanation that comes to the surface. And
why do we have so few of those? And the answer to that is blatantly obvious. Why do we have so few? There were loads, only so few have survived, and the only ones we have were intentionally hidden. Well, they were hidden for a reason.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I'm very glad that they survived, because it really does, like, from my perspective I escaped about 13 months ago after 43 years in it. But when you step back and you try to begin to process not just what happened to me personally, but like, what is this thing called Christianity? And you realize that past generations didn't have even a fraction of some of the information that we have.
Yes.
And I don't think that should have kept them from deconverting, because kind of in the 2 tracks, like, as I've learned more and more and said, this is all clearly bunk, it's mythology, I've had this other track saying, you didn't need to know that stuff to deconvert. You should have been able to say, he commands genocide, it commands genital mutilation, it commands slavery. It's clearly copying, other pagan gods. Yahweh doesn't look that different from other gods. You should have had more than enough to deconvert. But having said that, there are some people for whom they would need more, because they can always default to, if God's the king, he can command genocide, he's got the right. But so the information does help certain personalities, and it did help me a lot. And it's between the research and the discoveries of these documents and the internet even, it's been amazing to see how many more people now can just get basic information that helps them be more informed. And I kind of feel bad for the people where, in past generations, that wasn't even a thought. Like, they just knew that the Bible was the final word of God, and there was really nothing else to add to the discussion. It's like, no, there's tons more to add to this discussion, and we fortunately have a lot of it.
And to add to that, particularly in Europe, and it was probably the same in the United States, you can go back through a chronology of duress as well. We only have to go back to, I think it was 2008 in the UK, when the blasphemy law was finally abolished, and you could speak openly in the manner that I do without the risk of being prosecuted.
Yeah.
In 2007, I could pick up a criminal record for the information that I'm putting out on the internet about the fact that I believe the Jesus character was fictional. That would have been a crime. Not many people have been prosecuted for it, but it was a crime. It was on the statute book. You only have to go back to 1920, the last time that was actually invoked. John William Gott, and he was imprisoned 3 times for 2 years at a time, hard labour. He actually died just after his last imprisonment for crimes against Christianity, preaching against Christianity. 1920. That's not a long time ago. No. Go back a couple of hundred years earlier, and you had the death penalty for blasphemy in the UK. So you can see we're coming out of that, and now the information is being available. And that was one of the things that struck me about Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman would say, back in it wasn't until the 1800s that people started suggesting all this stuff. No one was suggesting that the Jesus character wasn't real prior to that. But there is actually a reason for that, Bart. Yeah, and it wasn't wise to, if you did think that, it was not wise to publicly state that, because it would have meant your demise. So, yeah.
It's true, and you're reminding me too of the issue with the witches, where if a woman were not even openly practicing witchcraft, if she just had some aspect of something she had said or done that made people think that she might be practicing witchcraft, they would do horrible, horrible things to some of these ladies, just to be sure that evil spirits were removed from the community.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just going back to your story. So your mom was a Methodist. Was she?
No, mother-in-law.
I'm sorry, mother-in-law. Yeah. Was that kind of pushed? So both your parents were not believers?
Non-believers, no.
What was there outside influence from the in-laws and the aunts and uncles and cousins to kind of?
No, it's quite amazing because quite amazing. The Methodists are not, the Methodists in the town that I live in are not Bible punching, fire and brimstone preachers. They're easygoing characters. They were fantastic pillars of the community. Did an awful lot of charitable work for the local community. They were more cultural Christians. It was a social base for them to go to church, and they took care of each other with a kind of a network outside the church environment. And they did. They raised a lot of money for the local community and did a lot of good things. So that was Methodism in the UK. And at the time, this was before 9/11, I hadn't turned that corner of Christianity has something to answer for. So it was quite a good mix. They were not that concerned about the fact that I was an atheist. But at the time, I wasn't, again, brandishing, I don't believe that. I just had no comment on it one way or the other. And it works,
Have you had people over the years try to witness to you, to present the gospel?
That doesn't happen so much in the UK. I've seen some videos from America that you can go to Hyde Park in London and you can get people trying to preach. But in the UK, it's generally, there's a designated area, you go there. And if you don't go there, you won't experience it. So apart from the school environment, no, it happens in church and it happens in the school assembly. And other than that, there is no religious influence around the town at all. Everything else is capitalism, isn't it? Just sell as much product for as much profit as possible. And that's why we like Christmas, because we get good sales figures at Christmas time.
So what do you think of when you see American Christianity? What is your reaction?
Wow, it's a conundrum, isn't it? We don't have separation of church and state. We have on the legislation a requirement to, I would say, indoctrinate, people would disagree with me, children in schools. You have the exact opposite, but the United States, or certain areas of the United States, seem far more religious than the UK in general. So it's when I see some of the videos from the United States, there was Jesus Camp. I can't remember the lady's name. Wow, I saw that video. children of like 10, 11 years old crying, so I've been saved, I've been saved. Saved from what? For goodness sake, you're 11 years old. But it's a completely different playing field. It's just not like that in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, the Jesus Camp video, and for anyone who hasn't seen it, I'll put a link to below the video, but or at least it's just, I'm not sure if it's available fully, but I'll link to some snippets. But I was exposed to something that was a little bit less intense than that. That seemed more charismatic, perhaps, but that general dynamic was very much part of my process as well. And a lot, I don't know if you're familiar with American Baptist culture, and especially like Southern Baptist. I was more in what you might call independent Baptist kind of group, which basically is still very Baptist. It just means that they don't have any kind of hierarchy. They don't report up to some other church. Although they do work together with other churches, they don't report up together. And that is a very strong part of their message it's about getting the kids young. And I think they realize if you don't get them young, it gets a lot harder to get them, which is, that's a great it exposes them as like, you are not just trying to indoctrinate in general, you're predatory. This is predatory activity.
Yes, yeah. I remember the name, Becky Fisher and Ted Haggard, wasn't it, in Jesus School? And Becky Fisher actually says to camera at one stage, we've got to out-fanaticize the Muslims to create more Christians, and we need to do it while they're children. Oh God, no. That's just so wrong.
It's funny though, when you're in it, and I've only been out for 13 months, although I would say I was thinking about it for about a year and a half before then. It's crazy that you really don't see it that way as a Christian. And I don't want to go too off track because I want to get to 70 here in a minute, but it really is fascinating how when you're in it, your goal is to make little soldiers for Jesus.
Yes.
And your goal is to basically say that the best gift you could give them, besides just a straight up gospel and obviously to get saved, but the best secondary gift you could give a child is to add to that salvation of thoroughly biblical worldview. To say, not just do you want to get saved, but you also want to see everything through this lens of Christ, Christ, Christ everywhere. Christ is everything. So the Bible's everything. And it's the best gift you could ever give a child. Why wouldn't you want to not just save them from hell, give them a relationship with Jesus, but why wouldn't you want to make their life count for eternity, not just in the sense that they have a transactional peace with God, but they are actively working toward the kingdom. And it's crazy. And when you're in it, we used to do what we would call Bible time, where we would literally be teaching the kids Bible verses, having them memorize them, and singing Bible songs. And it was like, it was a badge of honor. I was proud of it. I was upset at myself that we weren't doing it more, and that we weren't doing it more with more preparation involved. It was like, how can we increase this? And it's staggering when you step back and think, what was I doing?
Well, yeah, you are. They catch you young, and you're in a silo environment that the community won't let you see out of. You never get the opportunity to hover above and look down holistically and say, well, what you're doing with us is no different to what the Jews are doing with certain Hasidic Jews are doing with their children, what fundamentalist Islamists are doing with their children. So then you can see the whole picture. You can't all be correct. Some of you are lying. Maybe all of you are lying. Then you can, but if you're inside that bubble and you're not being allowed to venture out, you can't see it, can you?
Yeah, you can't. There's a quote that I saw the other day, and I can't remember it word for word, but Neil deGrasse Tyson said something to the extent of, if you believe in Jesus and the Jesus story, then you can't really call Scientology crazy. It's like it's all a different version of crazy. One just much more culturally acceptable just because we're all used to it. Do you ever, I want to kind of transition soon from this whole childhood indoctrination subject, but I do want to ask, do you ever just sit back and does it ever hit you, this is the biggest mind job that has, like, our whole planet for centuries, for millennia at this point, it's like people talk about, oh, conspiracy theory, this, that, you know, coronavirus, this, you know, the Illuminati stuff, you know, even crazy stuff. But you step back and you think, if this isn't real, then we have duped generations upon generations. And it's like, when does this end? I mean, you know, you think people worship Zeus, and then it expired. People worship Thor, and then it expired. This didn't ever expire.
Well, in one of my videos, Just Suppose, I actually put in a line that says Christianity is simply the latest religious fashion fad that was forced onto our ancestors upon pain of death and torture. It hasn't expired yet.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the first. There were, as you just said, there were others that preceded them. And I mean, the Greek beliefs, they weren't so, oh, you can take it or leave it, it's up to you. Let's not forget, forgotten the guy's name, forced to drink the hemlock because he refused to.
Socrates, Aristotle?
Yeah, it's Socrates, yeah. He was convinced, through argument, he was convincing young people to reject the gods, and they weren't sacrificing to the gods. So it wasn't an option. It wasn't an option to them, and neither has Christianity been an option to the Christendom of Europe since 325 Common Era. It was a requirement upon pain of death and torture. So it's just the latest religious fashion fad. It will die out. It's a case of how long it takes. So it's not that this one's never died out. It's just that it hasn't died out yet.
Yeah. Just last question before we get into your book. Do you interact much, or do you care to interact much with Christian apologists on any of these issues? Do you ever get into debates?
I have offered, and I've never had an acceptance yet. So I do get asked to present to groups and to do talks and videos like yourself. But I sent a letter to all 48, I think it was, Church of England bishops. I got 12 refusals, and the remainder just didn't bother to reply. And I've done that on several occasions. And I've gone to the local communities and said that I do these talks. Basically, humanist associations have taken me up, and I've gone and done a presentation at their meetings. I'm quite happy to come to yours, but it's like, no, we don't want to hear it. So
it makes me think. I mean, obviously, some of them are just being obstinate or rude, but it makes me think too that there is a fear there, and a fear of what you might reveal. And it makes me think, like, if I was a Christian still and I was in this leadership position, I would be thinking, this is a slam dunk. We to us as Christians, we know that the Word of God is true. We can annihilate arguments against we'll tear down anything that stands against Christ. And it's like, if that's not that easy, if you're like, well, we might lose this argument, we might look bad, we might look stupid. Like, how strong is your argument? If you have the Word of God, the truth of eternity, then you should have zero fear. I mean, at least as long as you're educated in the Bible, but what ministers should be, you should have zero fear at taking anybody to task and saying, I will show you how wrong you are. And they can't do it. And I know a few of them try, and they pretty much look stupid across the board, but it's like, so many of them just shut their ears and say, we're not even talking. Like, there was this pastor that he wasn't my personal pastor, but he was the pastor of a church that a lot of my family had gone to in Philadelphia, near Philadelphia. And I asked him if I could ask him some questions to chat with him sometime. And he'd known me for years. And he said, sure, yeah, let's chat. What's on your mind? And I said, well, I just want to send you a couple of videos, and I'd like to ask you to watch at least part of them so you know what I'm talking about. And then I'd like to call you afterwards and just see, bounce some ideas off you. Well, they were videos about how Christianity looked just like a mystery cult. And as soon as he saw what I was asking him to review first, he said, I'd like to cancel our meeting. I don't want to talk about it. And I was like, how afraid? What are you afraid of?
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're afraid that something might be revealed that'll make you question that's called cognitive dissonance. Well, that's not cognitive dissonance. It's the desire to avoid cognitive dissonance, to avoid having those two conflicting views in your mind, shut that one out, leave this one in, and I'm comfortable. Yeah, absolutely right. Yes.
Do you ever get the feedback that you just have an inherent anti-God bias, and that's why you can't?
That's strange, yes. And the answer to that is, how can I have an anti-God bias? I don't believe such a thing exists.
Yeah.
I can't. Someone asked Christopher Hitchens that, why do you hate God? He said, well, I don't hate God. That would be preposterous. Otherwise, I would have to admit that a God exists. Yeah, it's not that. I don't know. I think, again, Christopher Hitchens summed it up. It's anti-established theologies, organized religion that's the issue, not anti-God. So when I say I'm not preaching against God, I've got no idea with concerns with people being religious. It's organized religion that's become so strong that it gets some kind of special status in society. Those institutions, they're the problem. So where they see people like me taking a pot shot at God, that's not what we're doing. We're taking a pot shot as you're becoming too strong. Yes, you can be a mutual interest group, just like the sailing club or football supporters. You are Christians, that's fine. But you're not happy with that. You want that everybody else must be exposed to what you believe, and you've got to try and convince them to believe along with you, such that you can go into schools and try and convince children. So that's where Christopher Hitchens was coming from, and that's where I come from. That's the issue. That's what we campaign against.
And it's like, if they don't have that power, they feel an immediate persecution complex, even though it's nothing to do with that.
Such a special privilege in society. If we suggested that Mystic Meg should be allowed to go into a school every Friday and convince children that what's going to happen to them today is based on what month they were born in and what stars were in the sky during that time, we would say, do not be so ridiculous. Why would we want to do that? Well, why not? You do it for Christians. Yeah. Where's the difference? If you feel that would be ridiculous, you need to flip that around and look at what we are doing, because that's equally as ridiculous, but it's considered okay. It's part of the law. Yeah. That's where we need to make a change.
Well, I love that a lot of what I've seen of your work is dealing with this idea of how bad it is to brainwash people. I'm realizing I'm really dark here, and I turn some lights to me. Like, this is brainwashing, and it is a horrible thing to not just trick people into a false belief system, but on top of that, to do it in a way that puts blinders on, that says, not only do I believe this stuff now, but I cannot see any alternative that's acceptable. And you get people that say, if this isn't true, I don't see a reason to live. I want to die if God isn't God. And it's like, what are you doing to people that they would even consider that? It's so frustrating. But you were talking just there about the idea of going into a class and talking about astrology with what month you were born in. That's a great segue into your book. Your book again is called 70. Could you tell us, number one, what 70 refers to, and then what does astrology and astrological numbers and what's also called astrotheology have to do with the Bible? Where did it all come from?
Where did it all come from? Okay. Well, again, something which is not accepted but should be is all the current religions are based in astrology. They come from astrology. So prior to Judaism, prior to Christianity, there was Babylonian astrology. And the astrologists at the time, studying the motion of the stars and the rhythmic patterns that they make, come up with a set of numbers. And the interesting thing is that they didn't do that in isolation. The Egyptians did the same thing, they come up with the same numbers. The Chinese did the same thing, they come up with the same numbers. And they would, because they're watching the same motions and they're seeing the same patterns. And there is a certain set of numbers, a very small set of numbers, of which 70 is one, a very special one, that they come up with. And those numbers have permeated every society. They create our angles of measurement, our days of the week, our calendar, the names of the months in some cases. So the first thing they noticed was that they saw the firmament, what they believed to be the firmament, which was fixed stars. But within this dome of fixed stars, what they perceived to be fixed stars, there were 5 lights that were moving around independently to the pattern of these fixed stars. So they call them wandering stars. That's planet from Greek. And there were 5 of them. So they take these 5 wandering stars, along with the 2 main ones, the sun and the moon, and they come up with 7 heavenly bodies. 7 becomes a very important astrological, theological number, worthy of veneration. Through the motion of the months and the moon, the earliest calendars perceived a 360-day year. We know that wasn't correct, but they were the earliest calendars. They saw 12 full moons per lunar year. Divide 360 by 12, and you come up with 30. 12 and 30 become venerated numbers. And there was one particular astrological event that they realized that brought them to the realization of the number 70, also 72, they're used interchangeably, that was worthy of veneration. And that is that they noticed that on the spring equinox, which is easy to identify from anywhere on the planet, it's when the sun rises exactly due east. It rises into a particular star sign. And that's what they saw as an age. So at the moment, we're in the age of Pisces, because on the spring equinox, the sun rises into the star sign Pisces. Obviously, you can't see it because it's daylight, but it is there.
How long does it take to switch from one to another one?
That's where 70 comes from.
Okay.
They couldn't have realized this in one lifetime, but with measurement, they would have realized over several lifetimes that sunrise position on the spring equinox isn't static. It's moving, it's drifting across the horizon. And of course, it's the planet that's moving, but to them, they would have perceived the sunrise drifting. And over a period of what they would call a great month, which was 30 degrees on the horizon, it would move out of one star sign and into another star sign. If I get my maths right, that's about 2,150 years. So an astrological age going from the age of Aries to the age of Pisces would take 2,150 years. They call that a great month, but they come up with the perception of a great year, a great day. And a great day is how long it takes that sunrise position to move 1 degree on the horizon. So they've got 360 degrees, which is again astrological, and they calculated that it took 70 solar years to move 1 degree. And 70 became a venerated number, with 7, 12, 30, and 360, which is a time in the Bible. I believe they say there was a time and a time and a half, but when they say time, they mean 360 days. So those numbers, we don't want to go Da Vinci Code here. They're not special, clearly. I to put that out there. I don't believe they're special, and they're clearly not. They're just numbers. But to the ancients, they were special. So special that they're included in their ceremonies. They're included in all of the extant documents about stories that they wrote, and they permeate through all the way through to Judaism and Christianity. So if you read the epics of Gilgamesh, which predate the New Testament by about 1,000 years, the numbers 7 and 12 and 30 appear ad nauseum. If you look at the number 70 and you look at the amount of prophecies in the Old Testament from 600 BCE, the Babylonian exile period, that use 70 in their stories and their prophecies, the list is, it's not endless, but it's a considerable list. So even to the Jews, 70 was an important number. And that's the realization that 70 was an important number to the ancients that wrote these scriptures and these prophecies, is where we can then feed that through to the New Testament, the 4 Gospels, and see, it's all over the New Gospels as well. So if you are using the number 70 with regard to this character, you're not writing a biography. You've actually created a character and placed him in a time period that allows you to write a reverse construction prophecy fulfillment document about the number 70. So I suppose next, that's astrological. That's where the numbers come from.
Could I ask one quick question? You said that we're in the age of Pisces now.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea what came before and what comes after?
Oh, no, that's interesting. So the precession of the equinox takes us backwards through the zodiac.
Okay.
If you go back 2,000 years and 4,000 years, we move out of the age of Taurus into the age of Aries, and then out of the age of Aries and into the age of Pisces.
Okay.
Now, if you want to have a look when the transition from Aries to Pisces happened, it's about 2,000 years ago. I'm just saying. Now, equally, if you go backwards, you've got the age of Aries then, when the Israelite kingdoms ruled in the Levant, and we've got all of this theology wrapped around sheep, sacrificing sheep, the ram's horn, that kind of symbolizes Judaism. Go back from that, go back to the age of Taurus. Now we're into Crete and the Mycenaean Empire, King Minos, and they worship the bull. And there's lots of, from archaeology, we can see lots. So we can see through our own archaeology that civilizations worship whatever star sign they're actually in at the moment. And there are a couple of lines in the Bible that give us a clue of where we're going next with regards to Jesus. To the people that wrote the Gospels, Jesus was a god for the Piscean age, because he says, when we're having the Last Supper, well, he doesn't say, the author says, the disciples say, where are we going to have the meal? And he says, go into the town, you will see a man carrying a jar of water, follow him into the house that he enters. So Aquarius, what comes after Pisces? Aquarius. Jesus is saying, I'm here for the age of Pisces. When I leave, there will be a new god, a god for the age of Aquarius. We know better now that won't happen, but that's actually still in the New Testament, and it's one of the links to the astrology. Not a main link, but it's there.
And if it were 2,000 years, that would take us to pretty much just about where we're at now.
Yeah, so we are, I think we are about 150 years away from moving into the age of Aquarius. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Could I ask you?
There's no such thing as the age of Aquarius. It's a visual alignment of underlying position, but that's where we'll be. Yeah.
With the age of Taurus, this is just off the top of my head, but do you see any indication that that was woven into the story where Moses goes up on the mountain, and the people of Israel convince Aaron and the elders to make a golden bull, I believe a golden calf,
yes,
and then Moses comes down and destroys it? Is that possibly
reflected? There are some. There's Baal, isn't there?
Yeah.
And then there's Moloch, and there's Moloch Baal. So you got there's loads of different versions.
They're all reflected by a bull, right?
They're all pretty much interlinked, and not all of them, but some ancient literature depicts Moloch Baal as a human body with a bull's head and sacrificing children to Baal. And there are quite a few verses in the Old Testament that are rejecting worship of idols, particularly metal calves. And so they're kind of saying, no, Baal and the age of Taurus is out the window. We're now in the age of Aries. If you read it that way, it's there. Some might argue that you're looking for that. Okay, we might be, but the fact is, it's there. Yeah, it is there, and you can see the astrological. Wow, the sun's coming through my window quite strong. You can see the astrological roots. The astrological influence has died down over the years, and the people that have followed it in subsequent centuries have probably even forgot that it was even there in the first place, and then started preaching it down different lines. And it's no longer of any relevance to them, the astrology part, but it's there. It's still in the documents. And
just for anybody who isn't really following yet, what we're referring to when we say Taurus or Aquarius, we're referring to constellations in the sky that kind of like, people could look at clouds and see different pictures, but that they kind of came to a consensus that when they looked at certain sections of the sky, they would see certain kind of, like a children's dot book, they would see certain stars and say, this looks to most of us like it's a picture of and then they describe it. And so you could see it different ways. You could say, yes, I see nothing. They would say, we see a bull for this section of the sky and so forth. We see a ram, we see a fish, we see a water jug or whatever, someone holding water. Could I ask, do you know, like just a completely, this is off topic a little bit, but other cultures, did they see the sky the same way, if you're aware? Like, did the Chinese, for example, have the same, or did they have different pictures?
I haven't studied Chinese astrology too closely, but I do know that yes, they did, and they had different images and different names. But certainly Babylonian astrology is fed through to Judaism and
Right.
also into Egypt.
Gotcha. So we're talking about
constellations. Yeah, the
we're talking ancient Near
constellations.
East kind of.
Yeah, ancient Near East. That's where our zodiac comes from. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah. So realizing that they were the start of theological documents and they fed in, and the number 70 is clearly important to different civilizations and clearly important to the Jews because of the amount of prophecies involving the number 70. What gives the game away in the New Testament that they are just reinterpreting 70 again to come up with some new stories. The first point is the story of Jesus doesn't exist until after the temple fell. That we know. So Mark, I wouldn't say was the earliest gospel, but it's the earliest extant gospel that was selected for the New Testament that we have. It's the first of the four. And Mark is clearly written after the temple fell because there's reference to the temple falling in Mark. But it's written like it's a prophecy in the future. So it's written as though it's being written of events that are happening 40 years before the temple fell, even though it's been written after the temple fell. And the important thing is here that this story of Jesus doesn't appear in literature until after the temple fell. It's retrospective. That's an important point. Then when we go back to the Old Testament, there are two particular prophecies with 70 in that give the game away. So you've got Jeremiah and Daniel. So in Jeremiah, you've got Yahweh saying to the people that you haven't worshipped me, you haven't adhered to what I've asked of you, you've strayed to other gods, you've been unfaithful. So I am going to send my agent, Nebuchadnezzar, and he's going to enslave you, he's going to destroy your lands, and the lands that I gave you are going to be desolate. They're going to be desolate for 70 years, apparently. And then in Daniel, you get a restatement of that. Daniel later writes that the land here will be desolate for 70 years. So there's this idea of the Jewish community as being punished for their unfaithfulness to God, and that punishment is going to last for 70 years.
And that's part of the whole year of Jubilee as well, right? Is that correct?
I'm not too sure what you're talking about, but
was there a concept before where God said, "I want you to let the land rest" at some point?
Oh yes,
I might be mixing the words up, but some kind of rest, and if they didn't rest, He was going to force the rest in the land. Is that?
Yeah, there are some of the 70-year prophecies are about leaving the land fallow, but they go. I mean, just to give the audience a view, you can get. There will be 70 sons of Israel that will perish in this battle, and there will be 70 years of pestilence, 70, loads of them. But the important bit for the Jesus story are these particular two.
Okay.
And particular because they're saying, you have been unfaithful to me, there will be a punishment. The punishment will last for 70 years. After the temple was destroyed, clearly there is a bewilderment among the Jewish people. Well, we've worshipped Yahweh all these years, and look what's happened. He sent the Romans in, completely destroyed Jerusalem, and destroyed God's home on earth and the altar where we sacrifice. It's gone. So there needs to be a theological answer as to why Yahweh allowed that to happen. Excuse me. So they devised the story. And the story is that, well, it's a punishment. It's a punishment that's being given upon us because we've not been faithful in our devotion to Him. And it's a punishment that involves a 70-year span since the Messiah that He sent was born. And we rejected Him. And this is our punishment for rejecting Him. You put that thought in your mind. Well, that's exactly the same as Jeremiah and Daniel in that it involves punishment of the Jewish people for unfaithfulness to God. It involves destruction, going to destroy the land and destroy the temple, and it involves a 70-year time period. They've reversed the 70-year bit. In Jeremiah and Daniel, there's 70 years of desolation. in the New Testament Gospels, it's 70 years ago I sent you my Messiah. You rejected him, I destroyed your temple as punishment for that. And we do know that as early as 200 Common Era, there were early church fathers in their writings, Tertullian, I can't remember the other guy, but there were two that actually voiced that. You know, the Jewish people were punished by the temple being destroyed for not realizing the Messiah.
Mm.
So you come to the realization that they've just copied this 70-year concept in a reverse prophecy story about a Jesus character. Now, if you've done that, that's not a real character. That's not a biography. That is a fictional character. And they've placed him in history. Where this concept reaches challenges is, but yeah, King Herod, you see, Jesus was alive before King Herod died. King Herod died in 4 BCE. And according to Luke, he was born at the census of Quirinius. That was 6 AD. So there's a 10-year difference there. So, you know, your 70-year prophecy falls apart. I then did quite a bit of research on why we believe Luke is talking about a census in 6 AD, and why Matthew believes there is an alignment with King Herod and Jesus. So if I take Luke first, I put some notes down so that I don't get this wrong. I wrote Ezra there just for the first two, Jeremiah and Daniel. We all know that the Jews come back after the exile and they rebuilt their temple. In Ezra 6, 15, 17. And this, the opening ceremony of the temple was in the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. So the temple is destroyed in 586 BCE, and the redesignation of the new temple is in 516 BCE. 70 years, wouldn't you know? But again, it was rebuilt in the reign of King Darius, but it wouldn't have been the 6th year. That's just reverse prophecy fulfillment involving the number 70 again. So with Luke, although people say that according to Josephus, the census of Quirinius happened in 6 AD, Luke also says it was in the 15th year of the Emperor Tiberius. He's talking about the start of Jesus's missionary activity, and Jesus was about 30 when he began his ministry. The story only then goes to the next Passover, so that's less than a year, and this character is crucified. So he's, as far as Luke's concerned, he's crucified in the 16th year of Tiberius, that's 30 Common Era, at the age of 30. In which case, in those two passages, he's saying that Jesus is born in 1 BCE. So that conflicts with the idea of a census of Quirinius in 6 AD. When we researched the governors of Syria, actually, I pulled the research down here. We know all of the governors of Syria during the reign of Augustus. There were 9 of them, and none of them have had that post twice. All but a 3-year period, 4 to 1 BCE. We don't know who the governor was for that period, which is a bit strange in itself, but we know for certain who all the other governors were. And then in, I think it was about the 16th century, there was a plaque found in Italy that spoke of, I'll get this correct, a governor who had been Roman governor of Syria during the reign of Augustus. He'd held that position on 2 consecutive occasions. Right, so we now know it's one of these 9 that already had that position, and he died after Augustus died. When you look at all 9 of those governors and you say, well, which 2 fit that bill? There are only 2. It's a Saturnius, and wouldn't you know it, a Quirinius. So we do know that the governor for 4 to 1 BCE would have either been Saturnus or Quirinius, but who was it? Well, Luke tells us, doesn't he? He's using Quirinius as a date stamp. Now, whether Luke is correct or incorrect is immaterial. What's correct is he is using Quirinius as a date stamp, and he is telling us that there was a census in 1 BCE. And then you get the interpretation of a Father Luke, and this is I've looked at several interpretations of this. It's Luke 2:2, and it says, this inventory was born first leader of Syria, Quirinius. That's word for word. some people will say that Quirinius first held his census in the year of Jesus' birth, and some people are interpreting that as this was the first of his census. Who's correct? Who knows? But you can interpret that this was the first of Quirinius' censuses. Josephus tells us the census in 6 Common Era. You can put all that together and say, well, okay then, Quirinius held this position twice. He held the census on both occasions, and Luke is using the first one in 1 BCE to date stamp his Jesus story. So Luke is writing a gospel about a Messiah who is born 70 years before the temple is destroyed and was crucified at the age of 30 in what we now, in the 16th year of Tiberius, we now call 30 Common Era. And 30, again, remember, an astrological number.
Could I ask, as you're putting all this together for us, one question that comes to mind is, who are we talking about in terms of the creators? Because what it sounds like what we're referring to is there are people who were obviously well versed in the Old Testament and the Judaistic sacrificial system. We know that they were well versed in Greek epics. I mean, pretty much anybody that was well educated in that day was well versed in Greek epics, but they were in that group. We know that they were certainly exposed to Platonism and Neoplatonism.
Yeah.
We know that they were certainly they were well versed enough in the Old Testament to kind of rewrite, what Christians call typology, but to take the Old Testament stories and rewrite them. Like Moses went through the water, then into the desert. Jesus goes through the water, then into the desert. They're rewriting the story to fit a new paradigm. So you're talking about people that are very well versed, but now you're adding into it. You're saying beyond all that background of the general Greek education, the general Judaistic education, we're talking about astrotheology, very mathematical. I mean, we know the Pythagorean cult was very strong. I believe the Essenes may have been even called a Pythagorean cult. So we know there's a lot of the numerology going on in people's minds, and certainly the cosmology and the astrology. But who do you think is behind this, that's actually putting these pieces together, and then taking it and saying, we're not just writing a story to put in the library, we're actually taking a story that we're going to start to spread? Like, was this happening at the Alexandrian Library in Egypt? Like, who was doing this, if you have any guess?
And this is my contention would be, we can see evidence that this process happened. Or whether they called it astrotheology at the time, I don't know. They'd picked up on the number 70. I think by this time it's just numerology. It's just 70 right. Special will include 70. And they're replicating these Old Testament prophecies. Who did it and why? That's when you get into, that's where the debate and the research should be. So you've got the Roman provenance theory of Joseph Atwell, whereby they believed that it was the Roman Empire that disseminated these stories. Yeah. Personally, I believe it was the temple adherent Jews, bewildered at the fact that they'd lost their temple, being coerced by non-temple adherent Hellenistic Jews and their stories that they'd picked up from Greek, and just merging the two and saying, look, if we borrow some of their mythology, link it with our beliefs, our 70-year prophecy beliefs, we can come up with a story that explains why God punished us and destroyed the temple. So I think probably temple adherent Jews, which became apostates after the temple fell, over to the Hellenistic Jewish Jews, because Hellenistic Jews were anti-temple and pro-Greek. And they already had stories. Well, we could probably come to that later at the time. They already had stories about a dying and rising Savior Messiah. And Savior Messiah actually translates through to, as you know, Jesus Christ in Egypt over the centuries. So it's not a name, it's a label. They were already worshipped all over Turkey, all over Greece. Prior to this happening, they were already worshipping such myths. So I think temple adherent Jews, bemused and shocked by what had happened to them, committing apostasy from that, becoming more warm to Hellenistic Jewish thoughts, and then creating these stories as a theological explanation to what happened and a replacement for the temple altar. Don't worry about the fact that we've lost the temple altar now. We've now got a once and for all sacrificial story that you can follow for the rest of your life. So whether that's true or not, I don't know. It's my theory, and as I say, there's the Roman provenance theory, and there are other theories.
And just to clarify too, with the
That's,
Roman,
I think, where the research should be. Yeah.
and the Roman provenance too, James Valiant, Warren Fahey, Creating Christ, they have a different strain of that as well. Just kind of curious. I know we talk a lot in these kind of groups that we tend to work in. That there were many different Christianities going on, and I almost wonder. And this is kind of a question, but just a conjecture too. Of I can't help but wonder if certain groups made this just for themselves. With the whole mystery cult, like this is our secret. This is how God's really working his inner workings, and somehow it just started to spread. Because Christianity really does have a lot of parallels to the mystery cults, and I'd be curious, if you could theoretically, ask the people, with the translator, what did you intend to happen? Did you intend for this to spread over the whole world, or was this like a little secret mystery cult? I would guess that some of them probably at least didn't expect it to spread, but like, wow. So, and how do you think that the conversations changed? Like, did some people? And I know this is just conjecture, but did some people, do you think, maybe come up with some ideas, and then someone else said, well, you're forgetting about this prophecy in Isaiah, so we need to change the story a little bit. And someone else says, well, yeah, but what about, something from Moses? We got to, and they just keep on kind of shifting it, morphing it until someone says, okay, this is structurally sound enough to kind of spread it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
To me, I think if there were 100 different groups, there were 100 different stories and 100 different early Christologies. And people talk about the Gnostic Christians. Again, there wasn't a Gnostic Christianity. There were Gnostic Christologies. There were many different versions. These guys, after the temple fell, have just done a salad bar, pick and mix of all of that. I like that bit. I don't like that. I'll have some of this, put it together. We'll have a bit of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, put that in. We'll take some stuff from Josephus' Antiquity of the Jews and our own Messianic prophecies, put them all in, and we'll create a story about a real Jesus. So that's what they've done. But prior to that, there wasn't, this is what Jesus was before then. It was just again, as I said, Jesus wasn't a name, it was a label, it was Savior. And there were loads of dying and rising demigod Savior figures. And the stories were so different. We spoke just before the show of the ascension of Isaiah and the second treatise of the Great Set. Now, these are both alternative Jesus stories. And when you compare the two, although they're both Gnostic, they're completely different in themselves. And then you've got the literal Jesus story in the Gospel of Mark, first, which is totally different again, but you can tell it's taken aspects of these two and used them and put them in a story. Matthew in particular, the grave cracking open and the dead walking and the curtain tearing, that comes straight from the second treatise of the Great Set. Now, the consensus view would tell you that whoever wrote the second treatise of the Great Set copied that from Matthew. No, it's just over the centuries we've been forced to believe that the literalist Christianity is true and the Gnostics copied it afterwards. No, the Gnostics came first. And this story, the bit of the graves cracking open, was plucked straight from the second treatise of the Great Set and put in at the end of the Gospel of Matthew. So there wasn't a version of Gnostic Christianity or mystery religion, Christ cult. There were many. They were very varied.
So as you go through this, couple questions. Number one, did you do any digging into the Book of Enoch? Because it's become a personal challenge for me to start studying that one. I know it's quoted a lot in the New Testament, but then bigger picture, like when did people start actually worshiping Jesus? Like if we're saying that he was kind of made up and mythologized, obviously the legends accrue, but levels of it get added on over time. But when did people first start talking about this guy, even in a purely mythological sense?
as in Christianity, Christendom, and a literal sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
When they were first forced to, otherwise they would be beheaded or burned, basically. So we're talking 325 onwards. Once it became, Constantine made it a legal religion, but that's a bit loose because he did write a document which pretty much said, and if you worship anything else, any other version of Jesus, your lands will be confiscated. You could suffer capital punishment. But the later emperors, Valentinius, Theodosius, they really went to town, and they issued edicts which basically said it's the Catholic version of Christianity or it's death, even to the point of eradicating astrological scripture, other pagan myths, Mithras, and the old Greco-Roman amalgamations of God. They were barred upon pain of death and torture as well. And that continued from 325 right the way through to the mid-1600s. I mean, that's what, 1,300 years of brutal enforcement. Once you come out of the end of that process, people are like, yeah, okay, I believe. Yeah, you're good, I believe, whatever you say.
On the other side, how early were people just privately believing in this Jesus?
Privately believing. So post-70 to pre-325, you had a varied landscape. There were many Gnostic views of Christianity floating around all of Turkey, northern Turkey, Greece, Egypt, and in the Middle East, you had this bubble that started believing in the literal Jesus as a theological answer to why the temple was destroyed. So this new Jesus story was added into the mix.
I mean, going further back, like was there a belief in like an archangel or something else that was even before 0 AD?
Well, there were beliefs in the deist. There were beliefs in the concept of the Jesus character coming down, taking over a person's body and being crucified. There are stories. These are pre-70 stories.
Okay.
They are not a biography of a Jesus character. They are clearly mythical. In the Ascension of Isaiah, you've got a God that sits in the seventh heaven with his beloved, which is Jesus, who comes down with Isaiah through 7 levels of heaven and changes his appearance as he comes down in each one, so that he doesn't give the game away that he's actually Jesus. I agree with Carrier. He doesn't come to earth. He gets crucified in the firmament, which is a copy of the earth in the stars, and then ascends back up again to sit at the right hand of God on his throne. People believe that.
Do you have any idea when that was written?
I believe, although the consensus doesn't agree with me, that it's pre-gospel and probably around about the 50s.
Okay.
Obviously, the theological alumni say, no, well, it's an alternative Jesus story, so it must come after the Gospels, mustn't it? Yeah, of course, if you want to insist that their biographies of Jesus actually existed. Yeah. Then you've got the Second Treaty of Great Set, completely different. It says that there is a place outside of the universe called the Pleroma, where there was the good, the high God. And there were 30 aeons, and aeons are really human attributes, and there were 30 of them. And after the 30 aeons, it's a long story on how the 30 aeons get there, but after the 30 aeons are produced, by a particular circumstance, 3 more are created, which is Christ, Spiritus, and Jesus in the Pleroma, and they're aeons, they're not beings. Sophia is one of the aeons, and she, through thinking about where she come from, created it's called an emphymesis in her mind, and it created an entity that the good ejected from the Pleroma, and this entity is called the Demiurge, and it's the Jewish God, Yahweh. So he's ejected out into the chaos outside of the Pleroma, and without authority, he takes the chaos and creates the firmament and the earth and the seas and humans. And his mother, Sophia, from the Pleroma, injects wisdom through breath into the humans. And that's how we got here. So you've got a duality there. You've got Yahweh, who is a demiurge, a bad god, and the good, who's inside the Pleroma. Jesus is one of the aeons, the entities inside the pleroma, and in this story, he comes to earth and takes over a human body. That human body is punished by the rulers of this age, which is the same as Paul, yeah, the archons of this world, punish him by crucifying him, but they only believe that they crucified him because he left the body before the crucifixion and went back up into the pleroma. Now, you've got no space there for a biography of a real person. You certainly don't have any space for somebody born to Joseph and Mary and grew up and worshipped at the temple. You can't fit that in. You can't merge the two. But there were people, and again, I believe 50 and beyond, going back further, that were preaching that and believed that, but as a mythical Jesus. And then you've got Paul himself. I don't actually agree with the dates for Paul. The current dates are around the 50s. I actually think it's much earlier, but that's irrelevant. It's still before the temple was destroyed. And even in Paul's letters, he talks of the rulers of this age, the archons of this age, as though they are mystical devil agents that are ruling the world, and the real world is outside of this existence. And there is a lot of Gnostic terminology in Paul's letters. And Paul never speaks of a real Jesus. And here is the thing that, for me, gives the game away. Paul gives some teachings in his letters. He doesn't attribute those teachings to this Jesus character that's supposed to have lived 20 years earlier. They're his credit. This is my teaching, Paul. If you believed in a Jesus character, they wouldn't be your teachings, they would be his. And when you read Paul's letters, Jesus doesn't say anything to anyone other than in an apparition directly to Paul, and that's only very small. And the rest of it's all about Paul preaching, get yourself ready for the eschaton, because it's going to happen before we know, and then we're all going to have to go and be judged. And this is all Gnostic. This isn't talking about a Jesus character. So, but there was a Jesus was crucified and died for our sins in that, and there were people that were believing that pre-70. So pre-70, you do have people believing in a mythical, dying and rising Saviour, Messiah. Post-70, we add a supposed real Jesus in that, and people believe in that, but it is actually a fictional creation. But it's just added another Jesus into the mix. And there was a schism that formed then from post-70 all the way to 320, where there were some pretty vicious wars between these vying factions of a literal Jesus or a mythical Jesus. Constantine comes along, he becomes the sole ruler of the Roman Empire, and it's right, enough, I'm going to settle this. Unfortunately for the Gnostics, he comes down on the side of literalist Christianity. Not surprising, since his mother was a literalist Christian. And then says, one God, one empire, one ruler, and God speaks to you through me. We're now going to be believers in the literalist Jesus story. And then that was the case all the way to the mid-1600s.
And it seems like, too, one of the things that we're talking about, and I think a lot of Christians tend to ignore, for their convenience, is that there were a lot of other books. Like we were talking about, there's other Christians, there's fighting, even you see even within the text, where someone says something like, you can sacrifice meat to idols. Why not? Because it's not real. There's no real other gods. So sure, go ahead and do it. And then, a couple chapters later, it's like, don't do it. It's horrible. What do we have to do with the works of the devils? And, a woman can, certainly with like the pastoral epistles versus the others, women can be leaders in the church, and then others, women can't even speak in church. So there's obviously fighting going on, but a lot of this stuff is also not just the interpolations that are added to these books of the New Testament, but there's other books happening too. And it feels like one of the, and I'm preaching to the choir here, but it feels like one of the issues that Christians have with all this stuff, and I don't mean issues as in they're arguing against us, but just issues in wrapping their minds around it, is they're thinking of it as this canon, this book is the only thing that we need to look at, and whatever it says is, no pun intended, it's gospel truth. And it's like, they don't realize that there's all these other books. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, there's over 40 gospels that we found, there's like 6 different Acts of the Apostles, and there's a whole bunch of epistles, and on top of it, you get, these idea of the forgeries and the counter forgeries. I think you talk about, there's plagiarisms, forgeries, there's counter forgeries, there's people writing all these books, and some of them even stayed within the canon for a while. Like there's certain sects of Christianity that still have the Book of Enoch. There's certain sects that still have did have the Book of Clement. All these things. And it's like, you can't understand what we're talking about. You can't understand the origins of Christianity if you're not willing to look at these other books.
Yes.
I feel like one of the things that's helped me a lot is to realize, just even though they are other books, they're different from the canon, they're actually not that foreign, because when you really study where some of this stuff comes from, the Book of Enoch, this is just one example of many, it's quoted dozens and dozens and dozens of times in the New Testament. And I don't just mean like there's very really clear stuff like in Jude, or I think it's 1st or 2nd Peter, where he actually references Enoch, but there's quotes from the Book of Enoch woven all throughout the New Testament. And I'm sure that's the case with all these other apocryphal books. And so if you as a Christian aren't willing to step back and say, at least for our sake of argument, yes, there's my canon, I love it, this is my book, but what else is happening? And I think as you get more educated, it does help you either as a Christian or just as a skeptic, hopefully a skeptic that's willing to be honest with the facts, to say, yeah, there's more going on here than just what I saw. When I was taught especially the New Testament canon, that was only a piece of the puzzle. There's more going on here. Whether you still want to believe in Jesus or not is up to you, but there's more going on here. And what I have was coming from these other sources. It wasn't just like a one-off quote, where they might as well be quoting Plato, although they do quote Plato. But it's like, these are other sources that formed some of the meat, the hardcore structure of the New Testament. And without that, you're really missing the picture. And if you talk to Christians, that is, there's some Catholics, I think, that dive into it more because their canon is different. But for Protestant Christians, that's utterly irrelevant. And I would just implore any Protestant conservative Christians that are watching, think twice. These other books make a huge difference to how you interpret the canonical Gospels in the New Testament.
And if you look at the core scene in the 4 canonical Gospels, the death throes, you can see that those sentiments have been lifted directly from Psalm 22, Isaiah, Zechariah, literally wholesale, right, verbatim, just lifted up there and plucked into the death and resurrection scene. And it is true to say that if you took the New Testament story, you crossed out all of the ridiculous miracles. Miracles don't happen, we'll cross those out. You cross out all of the clear plagiarism, cross all those out because they clearly come from another work. Then there are items that just wouldn't have happened. In our last meeting, I said the priests roused Pilate very early in the morning. We want a quick judgment on this man. The same would not have happened. Cross that out, it wouldn't have happened. You get the guards took Jesus into the garrison and they tortured him. They said this, they put the quote on you. Hold on. How can a biographer possibly know that? So he would have to find out which guards were on duty that day, wherever they were in the world 40 years later, if they're still alive, to interview them to say what happened. So you can cross those scenes out. That wouldn't happen. Pilate's wife whispered to a guard something to go and tell Pilate. How could a biographer possibly know that she did? How could he even be in the room? So if you cross all those bits out, you're actually left with, there was this guy, he died. That's what you've got.
Yeah.
So you have to, as you say, open your mind and seriously ask questions about how all that was put together. When you look at it logically, it's actually impossible to come up with that as a biography.
Yeah.
But and it is the case that people are kind of conditioned not to look outside, to stay within and only look at it from within.
Could you speak to the idea that of what's left, that you just referred to, and some of the additions to it? How does that parallel the mystery cults, the Greco-Roman mystery cults? And we're talking, here maybe, the things like Mithraism, the Dionysius cult, Bacchus. What?
Yeah.
How does that relate to Christianity?
Well, we don't know too much about what Mithraites believed, because pretty much all their temples were built on top of, built churches on top of them, funnily enough. Most of the literature was destroyed. And I have a book from Firmicus Maternus, The Error of the Pagan Ways, and he says he's just about to go into a full description of Mithras and what the Mithraites believed, and then there's a comment which says the next 6 pages of the manuscript are missing, and then it starts again just after Mithras and carries on. There were 6 pages there of Mithras that somebody throughout history thought, we've got to tear them out and burn them, because we do not want people knowing that. And it's because of that we don't know too much. There's Plutarch said a little bit about Mithras and what they believe. We can guess that. We have no written evidence that Mithras' birthday was on the his birth was on the winter solstice. But we've got no written evidence that Jesus was born on the 25th of December either, because it's not in the Gospels. What we do know is Constantine and his mother and his successors set up these ceremonies on the same day as the current religious ceremonies in order to overlay them and drown them out. And Mithraism was big in the day. So we can assume that the celebration of Jesus' birth on the 25th of December has been overlaid directly on the top of the celebration of Mithras' birth to drown out Mithraism. You can't prove it, but it's a fair bet. Now, if we go into Osiris and Horus. Horus suffers a death and resurrection after a period of time at his birth. So Horus is born. Set sends an evil scorpion that stings Horus just after he's born. Horus dies. So Isis runs around lamenting, Horus is dead, Horus is dead. And the boat of Ra has stopped. And that's interesting. The boat of Ra is the sun's journey across the sky. Okay, Horus is dead, and the boat of Ra has stopped. It's static, and this goes on for a time. And Ra sends, if I get this right, Thoth to put the fluid of life of Ra back into Horus, and Horus comes back to life, and we're all happy. And the boat of Ra starts again, the journey across the sky. So the journey of the arc of the sun across the sky gets smaller and smaller and smaller to the winter solstice. Then if you trace the arc across the sky, it stops there for about, it looks static visually for about 3 days. And then after the solstice is over, it starts to rise again. It gets further north and south and higher in the sky. So the bit about Horus being dead until the boat of Ra can start, that's clearly a winter solstice, death and resurrection of Horus. Now, also, Osiris suffers a death and resurrection. He's dismembered by Set into various parts and scattered. Isis manages to collect all the parts together, everything but the penis. So she, in one of the stories, she fashions a penis out of gold. And this is quite interesting. I've had some retorts who say, well, he had a penis. No, you would call that a dildo, not a penis. It's made of gold. And with this golden penis, she gets impregnated with Horus. Now, that is a miracle conception. Whichever way you look at it, that's a miracle conception. Another one of the stories, which is in, excuse me, I've got a problem, Fred. Written in, painted on the walls inside some of the burial chambers, was that Isis hovered above Horus. Isis hovered above Osiris like a kite, and just being in presence impregnated her. Again, that's a miraculous conception. And on the Maternix Stele, it clearly states, and Plutarch relates this in his work, and I've seen the Maternix Stele in the British Museum, clearly states that after Osiris's death, he is seen again at Easter time, resurrected as a god, but resurrected, and then floats to heaven. So these Greco-Roman Egyptian myths, they had all of the elements. And the retort as mythicists that we get, particularly from Bart Ehrman, is, yeah, but no one suffers a death and resurrection on the winter solstice after 3 days. Oh, no. You can't. if you only ever created the exact story every time you copied a story, the story would never morph, evolve, or you would never get different versions. But you can say for certain that Jesus story has taken a little bit of that, a little bit of this, a bit of this, and mixed it all together. But not only can you say that, you can say, well, it's taken some of the Egyptian Greco-Roman dying and rising concepts. It's taken some of the Gnostics, Jesus dying and rising for our sins concept. It's taken an awful lot of the Jewish exile period messianic prophecy stories and Homer, Odysseus' journey home. I mean, Paul's journey from Jerusalem to Rome to be tried. This isn't my work. I've read this from various scholars. Mimics Odysseus' journey home to Ithaca in several areas. That person that wrote that story about Paul's journey has clearly read the Odyssey. And there are other areas in Acts where you can see well, that person has clearly read the Iliad, the first, because there's parallels there. So Bart Ehrman's wrong to say, oh, this is all being debunked because there's no direct links. And the answer to him, no, there aren't any direct links, but you can clearly see that it is a fractured, fictional, made-up story that's borrowed from just about everything that was on the table at the time that it was written.
Yeah. It's almost like it's a version of how they're doing the typology of the Old Testament. Like here's the Moses character, and here's the better Moses, Jesus. Here's the old Adam, here's the better Adam, Jesus. And it's almost like they're doing a similar thing with here's the Odysseus character, here's the better Odysseus. That's like a response to Homer or to Euripides, whatever. With the Bacchae, it's like but the response isn't going to look identical because it's not meant to be a parallel. It's meant to be an answer to it. It's going to incorporate some aspects that are the same, but because they're trying to say this is an old version, here's the better version, there are going to be differences, and that doesn't make it not a parallel. That just means you have to understand what the parallel means.
Yeah. The historicists have coined the term parallelomania. Oh, you're looking for any parallels. I saw a guy, Dave Allen, responds, well, we could argue that that's what you're explaining is parallelophobia. You don't like it being pointed out that there are parallels, and clearly there are parallels. To say there aren't parallels is just absolute denial. It's complete denial, and it stops research in this area, Dennis Trans, because the historicists, particularly the religious historians, like to say, "Oh, that's all been debunked. Don't bother looking anymore. It's been debunked. They're crackpot theories." And there are some mythicist theories that are slightly crackpot, but that doesn't mean there is no merit in the mythicist agenda. And also, it's true to say that there is no literature out there at the moment that can ascertain that that character did actually live in 30 Common Era, was crucified by Pontius Pilate, and had a following. There's zero evidence to support that view out there at the moment. So the mythicist hypothesis is valid.
Yeah, and I don't
think the historicist one is. Some people do.
Yeah, and this will be a topic for a different time, but just the idea of the historians that they're grasping at straws and trying to do anything to say that these historians are talking about Christ. And from what I've studied so far, just about every historian of that time, there's been an explanation to say that was either an interpolation, was the scribal edition, or it was talking about a different Jesus. You start to weave away, like you did with the Jesus stories, weave away the historians that seem like they might be referring to Jesus and they're not. This one isn't, that one's not. And then you add into your picture, all right, well, what historians were left that should have talked about Jesus that never said a word? Well, there's a lot of those that should have said something about Jesus. Yeah, it's like zilch. So you take out the ones that we thought were historians about Jesus, and they're not. You add the historians that should have been about Jesus, and they don't say anything. And it seems almost hard to believe that someone wouldn't, not necessarily agree with our conclusion, but just to say, you know what, you've got a good argument. And especially when you take it up from a level of the Bart Ehrman Jesus, which would be just, he's obviously not God, he's just a guy. He's a special guy in the historical sense, but he's just a guy. But when you're talking from a Christian perspective, you're saying the God of the universe who can preserve his word, and you know, Jesus turned the world upside down. You couldn't write enough books about what this guy did. You know, he did so much you couldn't fill the whole books of the whole world with it. And it's like you add this stuff together and you say the evidence doesn't look very good, and the fact that there's even a shadow of a doubt that there's like, you know, it's not like 50-50 here. This is like, this doesn't look very good at all for the Christian case. The fact that they won't even look at it, and it's just like everything that can be possibly twisted into this proves Jesus, this proves the Gospels, they just take anything they can and stretch it. It's almost like, to me, it's further evidence that this is a brainwashing issue. You've given up your ability to think clearly through these issues. You've given up your ability to be even an amateur historian. You know, like you can't think straight, and it's scary to me. And especially here in America, we just elected a Supreme Court justice whose primary worldview is mythology, and it's just
the world
shocking.
Is 6,000 years old. Yes, yes, that's quite shocking. Yeah. What you were saying, that Bart Ehrman is very vocal. He will argue that if you're not a serious historian, i.e. getting paid for it, you shouldn't be passing comment. And he also said, well, there is slim evidence for the existence of the Jesus character. And then we'll present some of the documents that you've put forward there. And this astounded me, in his book, Did Jesus Exist? He uses Josephus. How can you use the Josephus seriously as a contender for proving the existence of Jesus? I mean, in the passage of where it says James, brother of the accused, and in brackets was the Christ, or he is Christ, or was the Christ, and that's put forward. Well, hold on. You've got Celsus. Celsus is writing a rebuttal to the fact that this Jesus character existed, and then you've got Origen responding to that to say, well, he did exist. Origen actually states in his rebuttal to Celsus that Josephus mistakenly thought, I'm sure, Josephus mistakenly thought that Jerusalem had been destroyed as a punishment for Herod killing John. And in that passage, he says he should have thought that it was Jesus, the Messiah, but he states that Josephus didn't consider anyone to be the Messiah. So whoever wrote was the Christ in brackets wasn't Josephus. Josephus wrote his book in 100. Origen is saying, but he didn't believe in a Christ in 250, somewhere around there. And he's using Josephus's work. So he's got a copy of Josephus's work which doesn't contain that was the Christ. And then you've got the Testimonium Flavinium. And clearly, Origen's copy doesn't contain that either, because he responds to Celsus saying a soldier and a simple sorcerer. He should have went straight to the Testimonium Flavinium, that 124 words, which, you know, he was a doer of wonderful things, and many men followed him, and after he died, people believed they saw him. He should have went straight for that and said, no, look, he was divine. So clearly his work didn't have that, and that's an interpolation. But Bart Ehrman uses it as part of his, or here is some of the proof that this Jesus character did exist. But that's proof of an interpolation by possibly Eusebius around 325 to try and falsify the document. When you come to Tacitus and Suetonius, that's not evidence of Christ, that's evidence of Christians. Yeah. And we know Christians existed, and in the concept of Gnosticism predating literalist Christianity, there were loads of Christians all over Turkey, all over Greece, and they all believed in different mythical versions of Christ. So yes, there were Christians. We don't know what they believed, and those documents are only evidence of their existence, not evidence of the demigod that they worshipped. So there were books on Mithraism. They would not have, if they'd have survived, been proof of the existence of Mithra. They would have been proof of the existence of Mithraites.
Right.
In the same way with Tacitus and Suetonius.
Yeah. It's amazing, some of these. I feel like we could dig into all these so deep, and I love that, we hopefully can. I'm looking forward to getting a copy of your book. I don't have a copy yet. And I want to pick it up, and before we speak next, try to dive in. I do want to leave people with a little bit of an idea of what's in your book. Just first, I know we've only touched on the highlights. Chapter 1, Clement and Barnabas. Then Astromaths. Theologies Are Us. That's a great title. Rampant Plagiarism. Absurdity of Scripture. Weak Evidence. Cruel Origins, The Right to a Free Mind, and Concluding Thoughts. Just, that sounds fascinating. I can't wait to dive in. Sounds like an awesome book. And I do just want to, I want to ask you in a second to close this out, but I just wanted to say for my kind of final thought beforehand, there are a lot of Christians, or not, excuse me, there are a lot of mythicists, a lot of atheists who would watch this video and say, yeah, this is stuff we've heard before. Thank you for digging in deeper. This is helpful, insightful. But we kind of knew what was coming, and it's helpful, but it's not revolutionary to them. There are potentially Christians though that will watch, that will say, some of this stuff is new. I've never heard this. If any of this, maybe they don't even understand all that we're talking about, but they're understanding enough to say, I need to dig into this and figure out, what this is. And they understand enough to say, you're calling my Jesus a myth. And I just, for my final word for today, I just want to say, it is a myth, and I'm sorry that is painful. And if some of this does lead any of you to deconvert, it is a painful process. So at least if you're from a conservative background, if you're into liberal Christianity, it's not necessarily as painful. A lot of liberal Christians have told me that in the last few weeks. But if you're used to a conservative Christianity, it's going to be a painful path. It's going to hurt. But I'd ask you to keep an open mind, kind of like Mike has talked about it a number of times. You have not been given the full information. And what Mike is doing, what others are doing a great job at, is saying, look, make up your own mind. But if this is the table of your mind, there's some more information. You've been given a little bit. Let's put all the information, all the chips on the table. You make up your own mind, but make your own mind up with all the information. And I would just encourage you. I was in this for 43 years. I memorized thousands of verses. I went to Bible college to be a pastor, mission school to be a missionary, read hundreds of theology books, certainly dozens of devotional books, listened to endless hours of Christian preachers nonstop. And this stuff, if you're hearing it for the first time, it's going to sound like, is this wacko? Is this extreme? Are you making stuff up? I guarantee you it's not. You do need to do some digging. You're certainly going to find apologists who will quickly write it off and say, this is bunk, there's nothing to it, move along. Take a second look, take a third look. This is not bunk, this is not made up, this is certainly not conspiracy theory. This is real stuff. There's more to history that is readily available. You don't have to go looking for stuff that's hidden. It's readily available. You just haven't been told about it. And I would recommend, start with Mike's book and start with some of the stuff that he's talking about. Study the mystery religions, study what Richard Carrier and David Fitzgerald and Robert Price have put out to clarify some of this stuff, and other great people. Study the other books. Like I'm studying the Book of Enoch. It's not like it's the only piece, but it's a piece that adds to it. And there's so much more. And I just want to end my thought by saying, please, don't be afraid of the truth. It's gonna hurt. It's gonna be a bit of a ride. It's gonna be a red pill, but there is freedom and there is peace that you can't imagine getting out. Once you realize it was a cult, it doesn't feel like one, but once you realize it was, you get out and you think, wow, I could have spent my entire life in this stuff. I'm so glad I know. And so I would ask people, please have an open mind, dig in thoroughly. So Mike, could you wrap us up with some final thoughts?
Yeah, I'd say the other information that you look at, it could release you, as I say, from being an ardent believer of it being the truth, and open you up to a wealth of information, which is, yes, it does change that, but equally it's fascinating. You get into the realms of studying what ancient people believed. I mean, clearly what they believed wasn't correct, and they were misinformed themselves, or they were just trying to make up answers. But you go through a process, a journey of learning. There were lots of Christologies, and there were Greek myths, and that in itself is rewarding. It's interesting literature. Interesting if you don't view it as real, a revealed truth. It's not. It's just what the ancients thought. It was their answers to the world. In this interview and in the book, we touched on the first gospel, Luke, on why that links to 70. The book actually goes on to explain why, despite the common consensus view, or equally Matthew, Mark, and John also home in on a 70-year birth before the temple was destroyed. It then when you say Clement, you mentioned Clement and the Epistle of Barnabas, first Epistle of Clement, the Epistle of Barnabas. What I'm showing there is that a lot of these documents have been dated by the theological alumni with an a priori, I think it's called, isn't it? Where they say, right, okay, so Jesus was real, he existed in 30. So, and he was killed in 30. Any document that speaks of Jesus must predate that. And because he was real, the Gospels must have come first, and all the alternative versions come after. And that's the rubric that all of these documents have been dated for centuries. And that's wrong, because Jesus wasn't necessarily real. He actually wasn't. And the Gnostic mythical versions came first. So you can say quite clearly that these documents need to be redated without that thought process. And I've done that with Clement and with Barnabas. And when you read Clement, there is nothing about a real Jesus in Clement. Nothing at all. Loads of Old Testament regurgitated, no New Testament, and nothing about the life of a real Jesus. And you get to realize that this person, this author, is talking about a Christian community in Rome and Corinth in Greece that existed on and before 30 Common Era. And once you realize that, well, that's game over. The Gospels must be fiction, because you've got people worshipping a Jesus character before the Gospel version's even been crucified. So, and that's where Barnabas leads at all. But I think I'd close out by, again, reiterating your thoughts. Look at this information, and as you say, if you really do believe, it probably will hurt, but get over the hurt, and you open yourself up to another world of historical inquiry that reveals a whole load more. And the fact that these myths moved around the Mediterranean area and come from the Middle East, from Babylonia, and spread with each culture, and they all changed it a little. We know the ancient Iraq, Persia, they had a god for each town. Every big city had its own god, and those gods would go to war with each other. So there was a pantheon of gods there that you will realize if you study correctly, and you alluded to it at the beginning, Yahweh was one of those gods. He just got over to Canaan, and they dismissed all the other gods and just kept Yahweh and wrote another story. So and the Epic of Gilgamesh is right throughout the flood story in the Old Testament.
It's awesome. And you mentioned the Book of Clement. I know we're out of time, but I was just watching in preparation for our interview, one of your other interviews, which I think was audio only, but it was about the Book of Clement, and you walked the interviewer through that. That was a great video. I will put that as a link in in our video on YouTube, just so if anyone wants to dig deeper. I would love to dig deeper with you on a future video on that subject. Hopefully I can get a little bit deeper in my research first, but I'd love to be able to talk through that. And I've never honestly read the Book of Clement, so I look forward to just reading it and understanding how it fits in this. But also with what you just mentioned with Yahweh, there was a great video, again, of Bill Zersher, Seeing Through Christianity. He talks about Yahweh and its origins, and I know there's probably more than he goes over, but that's a great one. I'll put a link for that too if anyone wants to understand Yahweh better. But that was a great concluding thought, and I appreciate your encouragement for us to truly be historians. You don't need a PhD to study history. There's great minds that have gone before us that have put a lot of stuff out there that are PhDs that we can study and glean from. And just to quote the Bible, as much as I hate to do that in one sense, the truth will set you free.
Yes.
And that's probably a quote from somewhere else, I would guess. But the truth will set you free.
Yeah, Ricky Gervais, a British comedian, puts it right. So people think atheists have nothing to die for, and he argues, no, we've got everything to live for.
Yeah.
Because we believe once you die, for you the universe ceases to exist. You're here, enjoy it, learn, experience, do what you want, and live the life. Don't park the life for something that might happen in the future. Live this life.
Yeah, absolutely, and leave it better than you found it. Well, Mike, this has been awesome. I appreciate your last interview where you talked with us about child indoctrination and how bad that is, the abusiveness of it. I appreciate this one, just kind of going through the book 70 at a high level and about the origins of Christianity. I look forward to more of your work, more of your interviews, both hopefully that I do and others that you do with other people. Please keep on adding your voice to this. You've been more than fantastic at helping me, and I really appreciate it. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.